I am rising today on behalf of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus to represent ACR 176, our annual resolution for Holocaust Remembrance Day. Known in Hebrew as Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day commemorates the approximately 6 million Jews, including over 1 million Jewish children, and countless others who were brutally murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. Yom HaShoah also honors Jewish resistance during the Holocaust and is observed annually on the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. This year, Holocaust Remembrance Day is different, and for many in the Jewish community, the most painful in our lifetimes. We gather today amidst the backdrop of a devastating war, hostages who remain in captivity, and the horrifying explosion of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the globe. Many of us feel trapped between a generation of Holocaust survivors who are quickly passing away and a generation of young Americans who are unfamiliar with the lessons of genocide against our people. Many in the Jewish community and in the Jewish caucus grew up with Holocaust survivors. They were our friends, our grandparents, people in our communities with numbers tattooed on their arms who survived every imaginable and unimaginable form of physical, mental, and sexual abuse. They celebrated with us at Jewish holidays, and they spoke in our synagogues and community centers. Their stories have been seared into our collective memory, and their intergenerational trauma has become our own. And yet we are now confronting a generation where far too many young Americans do not believe that the Holocaust happened and who seem too willing to embrace the same hateful stereotypes that have consistently resulted in violence against our community. The rabbi mentioned this, but there was an Economist poll that was done in December of last year, and it found that 20% of young Americans agree with the statement that the Holocaust is a myth. And another 30% are not sure whether they agree nor disagree with that statement, which means that taken together, 50% of young people in this country acknowledge that the Holocaust happened, but the other 50% do not. Even more terrifying to me, a highly reputable national opinion poll conducted that very same month by Harvard University found that 67% of Americans ages 18 to 24 harbor anti-Semitic stereotypes. They believe that Jews are, quote, a class of oppressors and should be treated as such. So given such statistics, it is unsurprising that so many in our community also feel physically unsafe, trapped by the explosive hate that we can feel emanating from too many corners of American society. From Nazis, white supremacists, and extremists on the far right who believe that Jews are behind a plot to diminish the influence of white people, and extremists on the other side of the aisle who paint Jews as the worst example of white oppressors. So as we observe Holocaust Remembrance Today amidst this rising hate, we are reminded that the Holocaust is both millions of individual traumas that happens to millions of individual families, but is also a lasting collective trauma for the Jewish people. A trauma that has deeply informed our community's sense of security, but also our sense of purpose. One that has heightened our sensitivity to hatred and taught us that we must speak out fiercely and immediately against anti-Semitism, but also against all forms of racism, bigotry, and discrimination. You see, for the Jewish community, the Holocaust isn't a distant memory. In the 4,000-year arc of Jewish history, it's a recent event, a particularly devastating chapter in a lengthy book filled with painful stories of persecution and discrimination, family histories, and a communal history that is deeply personal to me, to my family, and to many people who are in this room today. And ultimately, Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah, is a call to action. It is the ultimate reminder of how quickly an advanced, educated, and modern society can unravel, of how easily hateful rhetoric can lead to deadly violence. For both the Jewish people and for all of humanity, today is a reminder of our collective obligation to do more, to bring the lessons of the Holocaust to all corners of this state, to speak out clearly and unequivocally against hate of all forms, and to rededicate ourselves to combating anti-Semitism, racism, and bigotry wherever and whenever we see it. In that spirit, and on behalf of the Jewish Caucus, I respectfully request your aye vote on ACR 176.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. Mr. Ramos, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise on behalf of the Native American Legislative Caucus to urge an aye vote on ACR 176. We must never forget how easily the hate and bigotry that spawned the Holocaust can occur anywhere at any time. Throughout our human history, we have seen genocide infect different parts of the globe in different eras and poison different groups, and that hatred spread, we should no longer stand for that hatred to spread in our communities and across our nation and across the world. Native Americans share in that same thread, that thread of genocide here in the United States. We stand united with our brothers and sisters. We must teach respect and understanding to our children, especially during difficult times such as these, so that we eliminate the possibility of repeating a history over and over of the sins that have been done in the histories past. We have to stand together as this resolution reminds us of the great devastation and inhumanity that has occurred throughout this world and throughout the areas that we call home. But we also have to show the resiliency of the Jewish people to be able to overcome those areas and that voice to be strong today on this floor in the state of California. For that, we shine on the resiliency of the Jewish people to continue their voices moving forward. And we do see you, we hear you, and we stand united with you in these times. I ask my colleagues to vote aye on this resolution, and I thank my colleague from Los Angeles for bringing this resolution forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Assemblymember Bauer-Cahan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I have risen every year on Yom HaShoah to commemorate the atrocities of the Holocaust. One year adjourning in the memory of my grandmother, who embodied the resilience of survivors. I've told my family's story of living through Kristallnacht, of losing everything, and of surviving. A story eerily familiar to the one you'll read in the book on your desk. But today, as our chair said, feels different. Anti-Semitism is something that every Jewish person in the diaspora has experienced, myself included. But in recent months, it has become unavoidable. Just this past Friday, listening to the videos of people at universities across this country chanting, "Go back to Poland," just puts an exclamation point on the anti-Semitism that now is so blatantly displayed. For those that don't know, 90% of the Jewish population of Poland was murdered during the Holocaust. Jews across Europe were sent to Poland during the Holocaust to end their journey at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the death camp that was the ultimate tool of the final solution to the Jewish problem, an extermination camp. Is that where they want me and my family to go? Permission to read Elie Wiesel's own words about his experience arriving at Auschwitz.
Permission granted.
In front of us, flames. In the air, that smell of burning flesh. It must have been about midnight. We had arrived at Birkenau, reception center for Auschwitz. Not far from us, flames were leaping up from a ditch, gigantic flames. They were burning something. A lorry drew up at the pit and delivered its load. Little children, babies. I pinched my face. Was I still alive? Was I awake? I could not believe it. How could it be possible for them to burn people, children, and for the world to keep silent? No, none of this could be true. It was a nightmare. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the little faces of the children whose bodies I saw turned into wreaths of smoke beneath a silent blue sky. Never shall I forget those flames which consumed my faith forever. Is that what they want for us? Is that where they want to send me? The thing about Elie Wiesel's words that ring in my ears today is the silence in the face of the atrocities. How could that happen? And yet it did. And we must learn from it. Let me remind you what the years preceding the Holocaust looked like. In 1933, Hitler established a Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. There was a boycott of Jewish businesses, and the Nazi regime capped the number of Jews allowed in public schools. In 1938, Nazis blocked Jews from entering universities and destroyed Jewish businesses, synagogues, and homes during Kristallnacht. So today, as we watch anti-Semitic depictions of the Berkeley law dean that use the same blood libel that was used by the Third Reich in 1933, as we see a boycott of Jewish businesses in San Francisco, as Jewish students flee public schools in cities like Oakland because of the anti-Semitism taught in their classrooms, as Jews are blocked on campuses like Berkeley as we witness the destruction of Jewish businesses like Smitten in San Francisco and the painting of swastikas on synagogues in Glendale, we've seen this story before. And what is our role at this moment in history? Not for the world to keep silent, as Elie Wiesel so aptly described. We need you, the leaders of this great state, stand up for your Jewish neighbors, to differentiate between the legitimate protest of a democracy one disagrees with and the demonization of a minority. I ask that as we move forward, you stand with every one of us against the disgusting rise of hate to ensure that never again rings true. My grandmothers taught me more than the history of my family, the history that resulted in them fleeing from the only home they'd ever known, the history of them losing their businesses, being kicked out of school, hiding from the roundup of Jews sent to death camps, and finally making it here to this great country, of surviving and of thriving. They taught me about resilience and hope. They believed so deeply in this country, the country that saved us, that gave us a second chance at life. But this country can only fulfill that promise if each and every one of us stands up to hate every day, at every opportunity. Speak out, ask questions, just don't be silent. We don't have to have the answers, but we have to be strident in the face of hate and anti-Semitism. Thank you to those who have stood with us against hate. I don't want to thank the construction workers who've just started the construction. Thank you to those who will stand with us in the future. Together, we can ensure never again. May the memories of all those lost during the Holocaust be a blessing and a reminder of our holy obligation to stand up for hate every day and in every way. And with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote on ACR 176.
Thank you, Assemblymember Bauer-Cahan. Assemblymember Ward, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise as the Vice Chair of the California Legislative LGBTQ Caucus and a member of the Jewish Caucus in support of ACR 176, recognizing Yom HaShoah. Today, we again remember the victims and the survivors of anti-Semitic and discriminatory targeted abuses carried out by the Nazi government. Among those targeted, persecuted, and harmed alongside the Jewish community, LGBTQ people also fell victim to the atrocities committed during the Holocaust. Hitler and the Nazi Party targeted gay men because they believed that they were, quote, unfit to defend the nation in combat and would diminish our reproductive potential. In concentration camps, LGBTQ victims were kept in separate facilities for the fear that homosexuality would spread to other prisoners. Other heinous state-sponsored abuses against LGBTQ individuals included medical experimentation, disappearances, imprisonment, sexual abuse, torture, and murder. Even after the war, the Allies, Germany, and surrounding countries refused to recognize LGBTQ prisoners as victims of the Nazi regime, a status essential for restitution. Even worse, many LGBTQ victims were forced to continue to serve their arbitrary prison sentences. During the Holocaust, homosexuals were forced to wear the pink triangle, the LGBTQ equivalent of the yellow Jewish star. Now, we reclaim and uplift the pink triangle as a symbol of perseverance, which I, alongside members of our caucus, proudly wear on the floor today. And on a more personal note, we will soon recognize two survivors that reside in my county, Mike and Manya Wallenfels. Manya and her family were one of the few from Busk, Poland, now part of modern-day Ukraine, to have survived the Holocaust. When Manya's ghetto was invaded by German soldiers, she recalls hiding in the attic and stables as she fled. Mike and his family were forced to move into Jewish-only apartments when the Germans moved into Hungary. As Hungarian Nazis gathered families that were living inside Mike's building, his mother instructed him to hide in the attic and not come out. However, Mike and his sister were eventually forced into a ghetto strictly for children. Mike and Manya later met in Hungary as neighbors whose families knew each other, where they would go on to get married. Words cannot explain the resiliency it took for them to survive the systemic abuses and the oppression that they experienced. I'm forever grateful for them and applaud the work they do to support our Jewish community in San Diego and educate others of the struggles that they and other survivors of the Holocaust endured, speaking at schools or through online forums so that we don't forget or repeat these atrocities. Now it's more than ever, it's imperative that we spread awareness of the stories of all those persecuted in the Holocaust, especially whose names, faces, and stories we will never know. As we acknowledge the Holocaust as a time in history, we must also recognize that hate is still alive and present in modern-day society, and thus reaffirm our commitment to combating anti-Semitism, anti-Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, racism, and hate. Above all, we must continue to stand in solidarity with all communities to collectively fight against anyone who claims that their identity is supreme and for a free, equitable, and safe society for all. I ask your support for ACR 176 today.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ms. Pellerin, you are recognized.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker and members. I rise on behalf of the Legislative Women's Caucus and a member of the Jewish Caucus to support ACR 176, declaring May 6, 2024 as California Holocaust Memorial Day. While Jews were the primary victims of the Holocaust, millions of other people were brutally murdered based on their ethnicity, religion, political beliefs, and sexual orientation, while they were held in concentration camps as part of a carefully orchestrated, state-sponsored program of cultural, social, and political annihilation under the Nazi regime. During the Holocaust, women played a critical role in the resistance against the Nazis and in helping the victims of the Holocaust. Despite being discriminated against and marginalized by Nazi ideology, many women demonstrated extraordinary bravery and strength in the face of extreme adversity. For example, in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, women smuggled weapons and supplies to their fellow fighters and acted as couriers between different parts of the resistance. Women played an essential role in saving lives during the Holocaust. Women like the Ukrainian maid Ludwika Pukas and the Berlin housewife Johanna Eck hid Jews and others persecuted individuals in their homes, often at great personal risk. Karolina Juskikowska, a Polish woman, was executed for hiding 2 Jews in her home. Some women, such as Irina Sendler, smuggled children out of the ghettos and concentration camps and placed them in non-Jewish families, saving them from certain death. Moreover, women in concentration camps demonstrated remarkable resilience and strength. Despite facing starvation, disease, and brutal physical and emotional abuse, many women supported each other and formed networks of mutual aid. For instance, women shared food and medical supplies, and some even risked punishment to provide education and entertainment for children in the camps. Women in the Holocaust also faced forms of persecution, including sexual violence, medical experimentation, and forced sterilization. During deportation operations, pregnant women and mothers of small children were labeled incapable of work and were sent to killing centers where they were often the first group to be sent to the gas chambers. Despite these atrocities, many women refused to be broken by the regime and instead found ways to resist and support each other. Overall, women in the Holocaust demonstrated incredible courage and strength, both in their resistance against the Nazis and in their support for those who were persecuted. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder of the human capacity for resilience and compassion, even in the darkest of times. Today, my honoree, Gitta Ryle, who is here at the Capitol today, she was just 6 years old when her mother sent her and her sister away from their home in Austria to live in France. Gitta's father was murdered by the Nazis in Auschwitz, but she and her sister and her mother survived to the end of the war. They arrived in the United States on Armistice Day, November 11th, 1946. Despite the horrors that Gitta and her family endured, she has used her experiences to teach others compassion and perseverance. I'm so grateful that she has chosen to share her story with so many in my community, whether it be through speaking at local schools, juvenile centers, and Rotary clubs, or by being here today. I had the honor of attending one of Gitta's talks, and I was so inspired of her life. As a young girl living through the Holocaust, she was confused and traumatized. Like, why was her family being torn apart, and why was she required to move? She spoke about simply existing for the first 50 years of her life, and now she is living. She challenges all of us to share her story that the Holocaust happened. And with your permission, I'd like to show a prop.
Without objection.
This is Gita's passport. You open it up, and there's a red J on it to designate that she is Jewish. And this beautiful, innocent photo of 6-year-old Gita, who lived through these horrific events. At 92 years old, Gita lives her Santa Cruz life to its fullest and focuses on good news and loving oneself. She says anger is a disease and reminds us that we can only change ourselves. If I may, Ms. Speaker, also use a prop and read from this incredible book written by Israeli-born artist and author Myra Coleman.
Without objection.
This book is a beautiful, simple yet profound page-turner of beautiful images of women holding things. On one page, the illustrator has her mother gathered in a home in a village in 1931, and Kalma writes about the family members. They also loved holding things before half of them perished in Auschwitz. And on the back cover, it truly touched my soul, and it sums up the role women played in the Holocaust and the role that women play today. What do women hold? The home and the family, and the children and the food, the friendships, the work of the world, and the work of being human, the memories, and the troubles, and the sorrows, and the triumphs, and the love. I thank my colleague from San Fernando for his leadership as chair of our Jewish caucus, and I ask you all to join me in supporting ACR 176. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise as a Christian man, and I rise to remind this body of the countless numbers of Christians who risked their own lives, and many of them died in the very concentration camps that they were hiding Jews from being taken. One in particular, a family that was highlighted in the book, The Hiding Place, and also in the movie, was the Ten Boom family. And they hid Jews in their home, knowing that they could be caught and hauled off to the very concentration camps. And yet they believed that it was their God-given responsibility to take the risk and to do a dangerous thing. And in the book, we find that the Nazis broke down the doors of the Ten Boom home. They hauled away the Jews hiding there, and they hauled away the Ten Booms. And in the book, there is this magnificent scene where Corrie Ten Boom is with her sister in Auschwitz, and her sister is dying. Eventually, Corrie was killed as well. And there is a line in this book that I think is probably apt for a time when we see the horror of anti-Semitism raising its ugly head again. And it was this. Corrie was kneeling over her sister passing, and she whispered in her ear, "There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still." So in the spirit of the Ten Booms and so many Christian people who saved Jews and many who perished, we are committing ourselves as Christian people to stand with Israel and to speak and to act and to remember. As many of you know, I'm kind of a junior grade historian. You've seen my office, and you've seen a portion of my history library. And to see the evil of then showing up on our campuses today, and seeing on some of our most notorious universities the phrase, the final solution. This is a time for everyone, including Christian brothers and sisters of our Jewish friends, to remind ourselves that there was a time when we stood up for them, even when the danger was our own. And let's stand up for them again, even if the danger comes our way. That's what God's people do in times when we have to stand, even at the risk of personal attack. There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still. I join with our Jewish friends and those who are here in the building to say the horror of that time is raising its ugly head today. And so the heroes of that time, Christians, Jews, and non-believers, need to rise up and be heroes for this moment in time. And with that, I'm asking you to join not only in commemorating, but also in remembering and thinking about those who stood in the way of the Nazis as long as they could, risking themselves, hiding, people they cared about, neighbors they cared about, in their own homes. The march of that evil is coming back again. It is rising, but when evil rises, God's people must rise above it and beyond it. And so let's take our witness of God's love in the deepest of pits is deeper than that pit, and that we can, through his goodness and grace, survive it, flourish in it, put our arms around our brothers and sisters. The times are calling us again to be the people of that age, the believers in the 1930s and the 1940s.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson.
Who put themselves at risk, and many died, to try and save those they cared about. We must rise to that calling as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. We called those individuals the righteous among nations. Thank you for bringing them into the room. Mr. Bryan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and colleagues. I rise this Yom HaShoah in support of ACR 176. I've been thinking for days that a lot of the struggles that many folks have is a lack of seeing themselves in other people. So I want to thank my colleagues in the Jewish Caucus for these photos on each of our desks. I found out today that Edith, Frank, and I have the same birthday. And I imagine that coincidence is not just on my desk. It's that humanity that I think grounds us. I've known for a couple weeks I was going to speak on this day, and I've thought over and over again about what I should say, what I need to say. What does my colleague from Menlo Park need me to say? What does my colleague from Long Beach need to hear from me in the Black Caucus? and I've just done a lot of thinking. I think about the conditions in Germany that allowed for a tyrannical dictator to arise to power. I think about the way that power was used with the consent of the governed and those in governing institutions to create a lower caste. I think about all of the laws that were mentioned by my colleague in the Bay Area, the Nuremberg laws, that were based off of Jim Crow laws here in the States. Prevention from accessing higher education, a denial and erasure of citizenship, the inability to own businesses, the inability to interracially marriage, to marry who you love, the creation of a racial identity for the purposes of enforcing this new caste system. You were Jewish if 3 of your grandparents were Jewish, very much like our one-drop rule for descendants of slaves here in this country. I also thought a lot this weekend about resistance and the Warsaw Uprising and how that was snuffed out by SS officers who went block by block, killing Jews indiscriminately. I think about the clandestine acts of disobedience where folks practiced the high holidays in secret and continued to be proud and Jewish, under threat and under fear, but still an act of protest and disobedience nonetheless. And I think of the Allies, the folks who created documents that allowed for their Jewish brothers and sisters to smuggle here to the States and to other places seeking refuge around the world. I think of the folks who hid families in tunnels and under floorboards, who risked their own life for the lives of others. And in thinking about all of those things, I still couldn't come up with perfect answers. But I know a few things. I know that the Holocaust is not a myth. It's absolutely not a myth. It is a moment in history that can and must never be, cannot ever be forgotten by anybody. I also know that my pursuit of justice and fairness and equality are not at all in conflict with loving my Jewish brothers and sisters and standing in solidarity and calling out hate when we see it. I think here in California, we have created a special place for all people from all backgrounds all around the world to live and thrive and to love and to see one another. And I think in this body, we have a responsibility. Like our colleague from Encino mentioned, today is not just a day of remembrance. It's a day of action. And that action is to see one another, as the Jewish Caucus has reminded us, putting these pictures on our desk. And that action is to move with love and compassion and in solidarity. And with that, on behalf of the Black Caucus, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Mr. Maritsucci, you are recognized.
Thank you very much. I want to thank my good friend from the San Fernando Valley for making sure that we always remember and that we never forget. You know, those of us in the Asian American community, you know, we always know that when there was a dramatic rise in anti-Asian hate during the pandemic, the Jewish community was one of the first to come to our support because, as our friend from the San Fernando Valley talked about, the collective trauma of the Holocaust will always remind all Jews of the importance of standing in solidarity with those who are being persecuted. And as we all know, I mean, these are such painfully difficult times now. And, you know, I was reminded of that when I was talking with one of our Jewish friends in this Capital community this morning, and I asked him about, you know, what he thought about what's happening at UCLA. And he, you know, I thought it was a simple question, but he just like froze and just let out a huge sigh, and all he could manage to say is, it's complicated. And to me, you know, especially as I just came to this floor from a meeting with our Muslim brothers and sisters who are here to visit us in the Capitol, to come to this Holocaust Remembrance Day. You know, as I stood in solidarity with our Muslim brothers and sisters to condemn the hate being directed against the Muslim community, and I'm standing here to stand in solidarity with our Jewish friends, in solidarity to condemn anti-Semitism. We know that the common fight that brings us all together is to make sure that we condemn hate against anyone at any time as we struggle to live in this time. I wanted to make sure that we knew and that we always kept in mind how painfully difficult this is, this period, especially for our Jewish brothers and sisters. And so on behalf of the API caucus, I wanted to rise to make sure that we see you, we hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Meritsucci. Mr. Zuber, you are recognized.
Madam Chair, today I rise on behalf of the Latino Caucus and as an affiliate member of the Jewish Caucus in support of ACR 176 in the memory of Rose Orenstein Torin. Rose was born and raised in a traditional family in a small village in the southern part of Poland. When she was 18, she was 18 when the war began, and in 1939, the Germans came in the middle of the night and rounded up her family. She and her sister Eda each fled. Their father, brother, and another sister were executed in a field near their home. Their mother was sent to Treblinka, where she was murdered. Rose never learned of the fate of her younger sister, Eda. With the help of a non-Jewish family who had held onto their humanity, Rose was given false documents and passed as a displaced Polish Christian. Rose hid in the open for 4 years, forced to deny her Jewish identity and her family. She was later betrayed by a coworker who she had entrusted with the truth. She was then sent to the Auschwitz extermination camp, where she survived for 2 years before escaping, fleeing into the forest while on a death march just days before the liberation of the camp. At the end of the war, Rose came to the United States, married and settled down in Beverly Hills, and later wrote 2 books about her life after her escape from the concentration camp. Rose is survived by her daughter, 3-time Beverly Hills Mayor Lily Bossie, who is here with us today, as well as her husband John and their 2 sons. Lily has made it her mission not just to tell the stories of the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust, but of those who survived as well, including her own mother. We are living in a time when our commitments to those who survived and were murdered in the Holocaust, our commitments to the Jewish community, are being tested. I think about Rose when I see statistics that Jewish hate is on the rise in our communities, and that anti-Semitic hate incidents are more common than any other. I think about Rose when Jewish homes and Jewish-owned businesses in my district have been targeted with anti-Semitic graffiti. I think of Rose when I hear from Jewish young people that they feel more and more unsafe about being open about their Jewish identities. I can imagine how horrified Rose would be to know that the slogan, "Jews should go back to Poland," has become acceptable on American college campuses, including at UCLA in my district. In these times, we're being tested. We're being called upon to demonstrate that the promises we made to never forget, that the promise of never again is not empty rhetoric. As Mayor Lily Bossie has said many times in the past few months, never again is right now. In the memory of her mother, Rose Orenstein Toren, and on behalf of the Latino Caucus, I respectfully ask for your aye vote on ACR 176.
Thank you, Mr. Zver. Mr. Gallagher, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. It's an honor to rise in support of this resolution. And this morning I'm thinking on when I was a young man in college and had the opportunity to go and tour the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C. And one of the images that still sticks with me from when I went to the museum is at one point you're brought to a place where there are all the shoes of victims. There's a lot of little shoes. Men and women and children who were exterminated. Millions. And those shoes were what was left. And I remember that image really stuck with me. And I remember, one of the most treasured possessions that I have, and I have it in my office, is this polished stone that I got from the museum that day. And I keep it in my office. And it says simply, remember. And I committed myself on that day that I would always remember. It was something that was very much a part of who I am. And I've carried that, I think, all the way through these 2 decades later, never thinking that we would have this moment in time right now, where anti-Semitism is clearly rearing its ugly head once again. And so it's important that we remember. And one of the things that I learned is that anti-Semitism can come in a very subtle way. And we learn that from history. Subtle at first, and then work its way through society until it becomes ordinary and status quo. Or as Hannah Arendt would call it later, the banality of evil, to a point where ordinary people would do horrendous things to their fellow human beings. And that is what we stand against today, and it's what we need to continue to call out. Unfortunately, today, people aren't being very subtle. They're actually being very clear about their intentions. Hamas is very clear about what they intend. It's written into their charters. Hezbollah is very clear about what they want. And it is to destroy Israel. They're very clear in their goals, and we should be very clear in our resolve to stand down this evil ideology. And it's clear that we have more work to do. There's a lot of great work that has been done over many years, but it's clear that we have more work to do when our own youth don't know what the Holocaust is. We have more work to do. When people don't understand the need for a Jewish homeland and don't understand that Jews didn't just show up in the Middle East in 1948, we have a whole lot more work to do. When people misrepresent and distort the term genocide, we have a whole lot more work to do. And so I stand here to say that I stand committed to stand with my Jewish brothers and sisters to continue that work, to stand against that evil. And my colleague is right. We need to make the distinction, and I don't think it's that hard to make that distinction between peaceful protest and expression and hateful acts, harassment, intimidation, and force. Some of the things that we are seeing on our college campuses and in our city council halls, where the same tropes that were said back then are being said again today. They need to be called out, and we must stand against them. We can disagree on geopolitical politics and still be able to universally condemn October 7th. That's not that hard. So I stand here today in solidarity and to continue that work and to remember and put that remembrance into action. And I long for the day, I think we all long for the day in Zechariah, where there will be peace in Jerusalem once again, where the old will sit in the streets and the young will play in those streets, and there will be peace, and there will be from many nations coming to that holy mountain. We long for that day. And so today, members, I join you in solidarity and ask that we pass this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Lowenthal, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Rise in support of ACR 176, and I need to apologize in advance for the emotion that will inevitably come in my remarks. It's an emotional topic. It's heightened by the extraordinary times we find ourselves in. For Jews, the world today isn't just surreal, it's eerily familiar. Despite how intentional we are to ensure the past is never repeated, we're currently faced with hate toward us at an epic scale. And sadly, we've seen this movie before. We know too well how it may end. So to no surprise, we are a people deeply obsessed with survival. Our sensitivity around survival is founded not only in emotion and generational trauma, but actually in data. While we all consider Judaism to be one of the 5 major religions of the world, we are actually only a tiny fraction of the world's population. Buddhists outnumber Jews 33-1, Hindus outnumber Jews 77-1, Muslims outnumber Jews 127-1, and Christians outnumber Jews 159-1. And moreover, while each of the other major religions grew roughly 4 times since 1933, the population of Jews is less than it was 90 years ago. We have still not recovered from our pre-Holocaust population numbers, with only 15 million Jews globally. And why? Why is that? Because we are continually blamed. That, my friends, is what anti-Semitism is all about. It's about blame. Blame for economic downturn, blame for spreading disease, blame for killing Christ or starting World War I, blame for controlling media or financial paradigms, blame for moral and social deterioration. Blame is what forced us to live segregated in walled cities within cities, the origin of the term ghetto. Blame gave rise to Nazism and the Third Reich and the systematic extermination of Jews. Blame has denied us from practicing our religion or even exiled us from dozens of countries since the Holocaust. Blame gives oxygen to organizations, governments, movements that to this day openly call for our destruction. And that blame is indeed unique. It transcends cultures, boundaries, and somehow never, ever dissipates. Not for decades, not for centuries, but for thousands of years. This blame naturally puts us in a defensive posture and somehow requires us to justify our strength, justify our achievement or our resilience. It's tiring. It's tiring for us, individually, collectively, historically. And in respect to this unique phenomena, Jews can be deeply offended and triggered beyond measure when any individual or organization compares the genocide we've endured with tragedy of any form elsewhere, whether deliberate or not. Because our pain, or anybody's pain, cannot be negotiated or debated. Loss cannot be negotiated or debated. Grief cannot be negotiated or debated. The totality of the scope of intent of the Nazis, the goal of killing every last Jew, man, woman, and child, throughout the reach of the Nazi Empire, using the administrative, bureaucratic, and technological capacities of a modern nation state and Western scientific culture, deserves no comparison. Nor does it require us to use that pain as a form of compassion. Yet, remarkably, so many Jews do. Colleagues, many of you remember me speaking at our observance of Yom HaShoah last year, and I spoke on topics that rightfully should make us all very uncomfortable, specifically of the experiments that were conducted on us by the Nazis, the lampshades used from our skin, the gold extracted from our teeth, the dehumanization, the torture, murder, rape, all done with precision and audaciously documented, as if history would reward not only the outcome, but the process that would result in our complete elimination. I spoke of that not only to educate, and certainly not for politics, but for strength. Strength for myself, strength for my family, strength for my Jewish community, strength as we face the past head on, and strength as the only way to survive in the future. I need strength as I remind myself that had the Nazis been successful, I would not be standing here before you. Look around at the Jewish caucus members in here. None of us would be standing here. We would not be here. So do we get triggered when someone tells us to go back to Poland, where we went from 3 million Jews to 45,000? Yes, we do. Do we get emotional when we learn that most young people have seen Holocaust denialism online and social media? Yes, we do. Do we activate when someone sends swastikas online to our kids to remind us that they are vulnerable? Yes, we do. Do we respond to support and understanding by others that are not of our faith, like so many of you in the chamber today? Yes, we do, on a scale that I can't possibly articulate. We live and teach and perpetually reflect on our past as a means to survive. We gain strength on days like today, supporting each other and feeding off the empathy from the larger community cross-generationally. We remain steadfast in our philosophy of healing the world, but never at our own peril, given the reality that we face. We repeat the words of those that survived to stop the slippery slope of anti-Semitism, so that one day we may also grow the way that other peoples have grown. We say today and every day, never forget, never forget. Colleagues, I respectfully ask for your aye vote on ACR 176.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal. Seeing and hearing no further debate, Assemblymember Gabriel, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, let me thank everybody who spoke today for their beautiful and heartfelt words. I am deeply grateful, and I know that our caucus is incredibly grateful for the solidarity that you have shown. And I want to thank in particular our sister caucuses for your beautiful allyship. As you have observed, the last several months have been incredibly painful and difficult for our community. And your allyship, your solidarity, your sensitivity, the way in which you have checked in with your Jewish colleagues has meant the world to us. And I want to make sure that I impress upon all of you how much that has meant. And thank you for all of that, because it does mean the world to us. And to see all of our sister caucuses rise today and speak so beautifully, as so many of you have done, it really, really does give us strength. I have had the incredible honor and privilege of visiting Yad Vashem, Israel's national memorial to the Holocaust, with many of you in this room. And what has always struck me about that museum is that when you enter, it begins well before the Holocaust. Because we know that the Holocaust didn't begin with guns, it didn't begin with gas chambers, it began with rhetoric. It began with language, it began with dehumanization, it began with discriminatory policies, the discrimination that was at first subtle and then mainstream, accepted into societies. And I think that is why you are hearing today the concern that we have about the lack of awareness for young people about the Holocaust, about what seems to be more broader acceptance of subtle anti-Semitic stereotypes in American society, those are things which are so deeply worrisome to our community. But what we also know is that if rhetoric and language and dehumanization can foment a genocide, can create the conditions for genocide, can allow people to wake up one day and believe that it's acceptable to kill their neighbors, acceptable to kill people that they have lived with for hundreds of years, we know that language can do the opposite. And we know that rhetoric can do the opposite. We know that people who are willing to stand up and tell the truth, who are willing to stand up and push back against hate, not when it becomes violent, but well before it precipitates violence, that can save lives, that can create a fairer and more just society. And all of you in this room are incredibly fortunate, all of us in this room are incredibly fortunate to be in a position where we can speak and people will listen, where we can talk to the various beautiful, diverse communities that make up the state of California. And so our ask of you today, which you have so beautifully done in supporting us in this resolution, is to speak out, to teach your community, whether it is a community of faith or not, an ethnic community, a community that is formed by geography, to speak about the Holocaust and to speak out against hate and violence of any form. And that is why, as our colleague from the South Bay mentioned, the Jewish community felt a moral imperative to speak out when we saw rising hate against the API community. Not at the point at which it was widespread violence, but well before that, because that is a solemn obligation that we all have to each other. So I want to thank you for the incredible sensitivity and allyship that so many of you have shown for us. And I want to thank you for what I know will be the solidarity that you will show going forward, because the lesson of this day is that we are all in this fight together. And the way that we will prevent another genocide against any group of people, the way that we will prevent targeted violence against any group of people, is by all of us standing shoulder to shoulder and condemning that. Thank you. And on behalf of the 6 million victims of the Shoah, I respectfully request an aye vote on ACR 176.
Mr. Gabriel, would like the first roll be open for co-authors?
Speaker.
Thank you. All debate having ceased, the clerk will open the roll for co-authors. This is for co-authors on the resolution. All members vote who desire to vote. This is for co-authors on the resolution. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll and tally the vote. There are 75 co-authors added. Without objection, we will take a voice vote on this resolution. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. To commemorate Holocaust Remembrance Day, the Legislative Jewish Caucus has invited survivors and descendants of survivors to join us on the Assembly floor today. We honor these individuals for their work to teach the lessons of the Holocaust, uplift undeserved communities, and work toward social justice for every community. Mr. Gabriel, you are recognized for your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And yes, as you so beautifully mentioned, the Jewish Caucus in conducting this ceremony, we're very fortunate to have a number of distinguished members of the Jewish Caucus with us today. We have always worked to center the voices of survivors. And for many years, we were able to bring up survivors from many corners of the state so folks can meet with them. Today, unfortunately, as with the passage of time, that is no longer possible. But we have brought up a few survivors who have bravely made the journey with us, and also some descendants of survivors and educators who are working to spread awareness of the Holocaust. And as you will see, so many of those who come from families of survivors have devoted themselves to social justice, have devoted themselves to standing up for marginalized communities. And we are grateful to have them with us today. I do want to take a moment, Madam Speaker, just to explain to you a few of the things that you have on your desk today.
Without objection.
So one is that each of you has a framed tweet from the Auschwitz Memorial. This is the official memorial associated with the concentration camp in Poland, where over 1.1 million people were murdered, including about 1 million Jews. And every day, the memorial will tweet out 5 or 6 biographies of people who were killed that day. And so each of you have a framed tweet from a victim of the Holocaust that shares your birthday as a way to try to maybe bring a little bit of a personal connection to this. When you hear that 6 million people were killed, that's an abstract thing that's difficult to process. But we'd ask you to take a moment to reflect, to look at the name and the story of the person who shares your birthday. I'm looking at a Dutch Jewish girl, Frederica, who shares my birthday, who was murdered when she was 4 years old. And I can't happen but look at her and see the face of my 4-year-old, Noah. And so I'd ask each of you to take a look at this and be reminded of those who were victims. We also are very fortunate to have the opportunity to share with you a wonderful book called What Rosa Brought. It tells the story of a young woman from Vienna whose family was forced out of Austria under Nazi occupation, and as you heard, has some interesting parallels to our presiding officer today, to this family of her story. And we're very fortunate to have with us as one of our honorees a really wonderful, prominent literary agent, Jen Roffey, here in the state of California, who was helped to represent the illustrator of this book. And also Jen's family, the pictures of her family, and she's a descendant of Holocaust survivors, actually helped to inform the illustration of this. So this is, I hope as you read this, will know that this, and share this with young people, with people in your family, this is the personal history of many people in our community. It may not be exactly the history, but this is the family story of many of your Jewish constituents, friends, relatives, neighbors, and of people, your colleagues here at work. So we're honored to be able to share that with you. And finally, let me just say a huge thank you to our colleague from Long Beach, Assemblymember Lowenthal, who was instrumental in organizing today, and a huge thank you to our former members of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus, so many of whom took time out of their busy schedules to join us today. So thank you, Madam Speaker, and we appreciate this moment to remember those who were victims of the Holocaust.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. As I said, I'm the descendant of survivors today. I'm wearing a pin that was my grandmother's, who, when you read that story, you'll know much of what she experienced on her way out of Austria. I will be appointing an escort committee to bring our honorees onto the floor for our ceremony. Members should retire to the rear of the chamber as I call your name. Assembly members Gabriel, Lowenthal, Pellerin, Ward, Friedman, Zabur, and Addis. Additionally, as you heard, we have many former members of the Legislative Jewish Caucus with us today. Thank you all for being here. It means a lot. And they will also be escorting our distinguished honorees to the front of the chamber. I ask that Speaker Rivas and Leader Gallagher move to the front center of the aisle to receive our honorees. Members, it is now time to introduce and welcome our 2024 Holocaust Remembrance honorees. The clerk will read.
Escorted by Assemblymember Gabriel and former Speaker of the Assembly, John A. Perez, is Jennifer Roffey. Jennifer is the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors and Cuban Jewish refugees. Her grandparents met at a displaced persons camp in Germany, where they married and gave birth to Jennifer's father, Larry. As a literary agent for authors and illustrators of children's literature, Jen's clients include award-winning and best-selling creators, such as the illustrator of What Rosa Brought, a powerful picture book about a young Jewish girl fleeing Nazi occupation. Please welcome Jennifer. Escorted by Assemblymember Lowenthal and former Assemblymember Bonnie Lowenthal is Peter Levy. Peter serves as the Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League, Orange County and Long Beach. He has been deeply involved in interfaith relations, including fostering Jewish-Muslim relations through dialogue and shared community programming. He has worked to combat discrimination against marginalized groups, advocated for gender equality, and pushed back against the rising tide of delegitimization of Israel. Please welcome Peter Levy. Escorted by Assemblymember Pellerin and former Assemblymember Mark Levine is Gitta Ryle. Gitta was 7 years old when her mother sent her and 10-year-old sister Renee from their home in Vienna, Austria, to France to hide from the Nazis. What followed was 7 years of separation, fear, hiding, and constantly hoping they would not be caught and killed. Gitta's father was killed in Auschwitz. Now, Gitta tells her story and reflects on what it means in our time, and how therapy helped her want to live and shed the anger that was weighing her down. She recently celebrated her 92nd birthday and finds purpose in telling her story, so no one can deny history. Please welcome Gitta Ryle. Escorted by Assemblymember Ward and former Assemblymember Mike Feuer is Mike and Manya Wallenfels. Mike is the secretary, and Manya is the vice president of the New Life Club under the Jewish Federation of San Diego. Founded in 1953, the New Life Club is an organization of survivors of the Holocaust. The New Life Club's monthly meetings include speakers, films, theater, and musical performances. Mike and Manya speak at schools throughout San Diego and around the world to help drive Holocaust education. Please welcome Mike and Manya Wallenfels. Escorted by Assemblymember Friedman and former Assemblymember Von Blumenfield is Carolyn Siegel. Carolyn is the founder and executive director of If You Heard What I Heard, a nonprofit documenting stories of grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. After an anti-Semitic incident in Los Angeles in May 2020, Carolyn thought if more people today heard what she heard her whole life, there wouldn't be such high amounts of anti-Semitism in the world. There are now 47 interviews on the organization's website, with more on the way. If You Heard What I Heard has an extensive waitlist of grandchildren of Holocaust survivors who are ready to share their stories. Please welcome Carolyn Siegel. Escorted by Assemblymember Zabur and former Assemblymember Alan Lowenthal is Lily Boss. Lily is the only child of Holocaust survivors who met in Israel shortly after World War II and immigrated to the United States. Her mother, Rosa, wrote 2 books about her experiences after escaping Auschwitz. Lily is the former mayor of Beverly Hills and has long been an education advocate. In 2022, she joined municipal leaders from 53 cities and 23 countries to sign a historic declaration committed to fighting anti-Semitism in all of its manifestations via cooperative education, raising awareness, and promoting interfaith relations. Please welcome Lily Boss. And escorted by Assemblymember Addis and former Assemblymember Jose Medina is Kate Daniels. Kate is the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. Kate's work as an educator and public servant, especially in areas of human rights and justices, equity, and climate change, is the direct result of her family's legacy. She has spent a lifetime helping communities at home and abroad. On March 5th, she was elected to the District 5 seat on the Monterey County Board of Supervisors. Please welcome Kate Daniels.
On behalf of Co-Chair Gabriel and the members of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus, thank you all for your words today, your solidarity, and for helping us observe Holocaust Remembrance Day and recognizing the inspirational work of this year's honorees. Thank you each for everything you do in our communities to help educate about this atrocious part of our history. This concludes today's ceremony.